Alright, now listen close because what I'm about to walk you through isn't something that came out all at once, no sir. This one came out in little cracks, little whispers, little glances that folks kept brushing aside while saying, nah, nothing's going on there. But you and I both know that when something looks too calm on the surface, that just means there's a whole lot of motion happening down below. And that's exactly how this whole thing with JD Vance, his wife Usha, and Erika Kirk started simmering long before anybody bothered to admit it, and long before anyone realized how deep the roots really ran. See, there's a moment in every story where something begins to shift, a quiet pivot, a flick of the wrist that changes everything. And for Usha Vance, that moment came the day she walked into a room she'd walked into 100 times before, but something felt different in the air. Something sharp, something unsettled, something she couldn't quite name. And that's when she first realized that Erika Kirk had been working on something behind the scenes, something that touched her husband's world a little too closely, not romantically, not scandalous in the tabloid sense, but personal, ideological, foundational, the kind of thing that tilts the ground under your feet, the kind of thing that can make a man question who he's listening to, what he stands for, and where he's being led. And Usha, she's not the type to shout, not the type to gossip, not the type to toss gasoline on embers just to watch them glow. No, she's deliberate, she's steady, she's observant, and she started noticing how, every time JD came home after one of those long private strategy sessions that included Erika, his rhythm was off. His mind was somewhere else. His voice had a different weight to it, like he was carrying thoughts that weren't entirely his own anymore. Now JD is a man who's walked through fire before. He's had to find himself, rebuild himself, reshape himself from the inside out. So when a subtle shift shows up in him, someone who knows him as deeply as Usha notices immediately, and she started seeing this pattern, this tug of war inside him, this push and pull between the world he promised to build for his family and the world people around him were urging him to step into. And Erika Kirk, well, Erika's a force in her own right, charismatic, driven, always seeing 10 steps ahead, always thinking of the next platform, the next message, the next movement, the next big narrative that could shape the political and cultural winds of the moment. And she had this way of pulling conversations into deeper corners, into more radical angles, pushing bigger ideas, harder ideas, ideas that didn't always line up with the steadier, sober vision that Usha believed her husband was grounded in. So when Usha finally decided to speak up, not publicly at first, not with fireworks, not with accusations, but with that quiet, steady resolve she carries, she asked JD the question she'd been holding in her chest for weeks. Are you sure the people guiding you have your best interest at heart? Are you sure they aren't steering you into something that doesn't align with who you truly are? And JD, he's a straightforward man most of the time, but this time he hesitated because he knew exactly what she was asking, and he knew that behind that question was another question. Are you still you, or are you becoming the version of you someone else wants? That was the moment Usha realized she needed to understand exactly what Erika had been influencing behind closed doors. Because influence can be subtle, influence can be slippery, influence can walk into a room smiling and leave with your decisions in its pocket. Now, the tricky part here is that nothing Erika did was outwardly wrong. She didn't cross lines in the way folks like drama channels might hope. But she did push, she did steer, she did encourage JD to adopt a tone, a stance, a posture that didn't always sit well with the woman who knew him better than anyone alive. So Usha started listening, watching, paying attention to the things JD came home saying, the things he hesitated to say, the things he repeated as if rehearsed, and soon enough she could trace the fingerprints, the phrasing, the angles, the dramatic framing, straight back to Erika. And then came the moment that sparked everything. A private meeting that JD stepped into, expecting a simple talk about messaging. But what he walked into instead was a fully formed plan that Erika had drafted, a plan that would pull him deeper into a combative, high conflict public posture that Usha knew could tear their family apart. JD came home that evening quiet, thoughtful, pacing a little more than usual, and when Usha asked what happened, he just exhaled slow and handed her the binder Erika had given him, a binder full of strategies, scripts, narratives, even emotional arcs, a complete identity makeover meant to sharpen him into something more aggressive, more inflammatory, more divisive. And Usha read every page, every bullet point, every note scribbled in the margins, and by the end of it, she felt something tighten in her chest, because this wasn't JD. This wasn't the man she married. This wasn't the man who fought his way out of hardship with integrity and groundedness. This was someone else's version of him, someone else's reflection, someone else's projection. That's when she decided she couldn't stay silent anymore, couldn't sit back and watch someone slowly reshape her husband with subtle pressure and confident rhetoric. So she spoke, first to JD, then to the people around him, and eventually, when the Whisper Network started twisting the story into something it wasn't, she spoke publicly, not to start a firestorm, but to draw a line, to remind folks that influence has limits, that guidance is not ownership, that strong personalities don't get to rewrite a man's values just because they've mastered the art of persuasion. And when she spoke, the truth rolled out with the kind of clarity you don't argue with, the kind of sincerity that lands heavy in a room. She wasn't calling out an affair. She wasn't calling out betrayal. She was calling out control, manipulation through charm, subtle pressure dressed as partnership. She said she'd watched her husband wrestle with voices that spoke louder than his own instincts, and she wasn't about to let anyone, not Erika, not advisors, not strategists, pull him away from the man he fought so hard to become. Her message wasn't messy, it wasn't cruel, it wasn't dramatic, it was protective, fierce, grounded in love, grounded in truth. And once she said it, the whole energy around JD shifted, like someone finally cracked a window in a room that had been sealed too tight. JD began pulling back from the more extreme edges Erika had been urging him toward, started returning to the steadier lane that matched his core, started brushing off the dramatic flair she'd woven into his messaging. And Erika, well, she didn't take kindly to that shift. Folks like her rarely do. And for a while there things were tense, professional on the surface but cold in the shadows, because nothing stings quite like losing influence over a man you thought you could shape. But at the end of the day, Usha's clarity held firm, and JD eventually admitted that he'd been drifting, not because he meant to, not because he wanted to, but because sometimes strong voices can override your compass without you realizing it. And that's the part folks don't talk about often. How easy it is for leaders to fall under the spell of people who speak with certainty, who offer bold visions, who present themselves as the keepers of destiny, when in reality they're just very good at selling their own worldview. So when Usha spoke, she didn't expose a scandal. She exposed influence, she exposed pressure, she exposed the slow erosion of authenticity that happens when someone with a strong agenda gets too close to the decision-making table. And the whole thing became a lesson, not just for JD, not just for the folks watching from the sidelines, but for anybody who's ever felt themselves drifting away from who they are because someone else's confidence drowned out their intuition. She reminded people that protecting someone's integrity isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's a whispered truth spoken at the right moment. Sometimes it's a wife placing her hand on her husband's chest and saying, "Come back to yourself." And that's the story. The slow unwinding of influence, the recalibration of a man pulled in too many directions, the firm, steady voice of a woman who refused to let her family get shaped by people who didn't understand the cost. Stay grounded, stay aware, stay aligned, and if you like this story, go on now and subscribe to the channel.